Before we head into the next phase of our project, let's take a moment to check in on our file management. That usually starts to get out of hand after a couple of projects. So what you should have on both your web space, your hosting space, and in your GRD 188 folder on your computer should look something like this. You should have a folder for the CSS crash course that you just completed, and all of the files for it should be in there. You should have a folder for the HTML crash course that you just completed, and all of the files for that should be in there. Then you should have a portfolio-html folder, and that should have really just the template that you built to begin with in it as a backup. And then everything else inside your 188 folder are files that support the portfolio site that we're building. So that includes the web fonts folder for Font Awesome. It includes a template.html page, a styleguide.html page, a folder for images, which could be called IMG or images, either one is fine. A downloads folder. That downloads folder should contain a PDF that represents your resume, whether you have a resume or not, just a PDF will do. And then a CSS folder that has the style sheet for Font Awesome, which is all.min.css, as well as your custom style sheet, which currently doesn't have much in it, but it's called styles.css. Now, if you have this on your local space in your 188 folder, you're probably doing okay, but it is very likely that if things are out of hand, it's going to be on your hosting space. So let's take a look really quickly in FileZilla here, using FileZilla to take a look at what's going on the hosting space. We should be able to quickly connect to our hosting space, and we should see something similar. Right, so for you it should be identical. For me it should be similar only because I'm keeping some other things in there as the instructor. But what I should see here is when we are looking at the root of your hosting space, which is the very topmost folder that you have access to, as compared to the contents of your GRD 188 folder, they should look identical. Now you might have a couple of folders in there that you didn't make, like this one we've talked about before called .well-known. Anytime you see a folder that begins with a dot, or a file name that begins with a dot and there's nothing before it, that's generally for the computer. So if you see that, don't worry about it. If you see this one of this ds_store, don't worry about that. But as far as all of the files that look like normal files, they should be identical. So we should see template.html here. We should see styleguide.html. We should see that web fonts folder, portfolio-html, IMG, downloads, CSS. And then there should also be the HTML crash course and the CSS crash course. So if you have, for example, over here a folder called GRD 188, you've already overcomplicated your hosting space and your file management. So what you want to do is pull everything out of that and treat GRD 188 as your local equivalent to your hosting space, right? So I should never actually see a GRD 188 folder over here in your hosting space. It's just meant to represent the topmost folder of your hosting space on your computer. Now, likewise, if you have more than one of these files, if I click into, say, the images folder and I see another version or another copy of this, what's usually happened there is that when you've decided to copy things over, and a lot of times you might have actually taken everything, and if you copy this over and you drag over a folder, do you see that plus sign that's right next to my cursor? What that means is if I drag over a folder, it's going to create a copy, and it's going to put a copy of all of these files inside that folder, and we don't want that. So what we want to do is we want to always aim for the white space over here, or even over the files, because files can't hold other files. You really just want to avoid the folders here when you're dragging and dropping, and just make sure that you're dragging and dropping over white space or over files is fine. Avoid the folders, because all that's going to do is create a copy instead of overwriting it. So make sure you're doing that properly as well. So go ahead and take a look at your file management before we start the next bit, and do a little bit of cleanup if you need to, especially on your hosting space. And if it is really so far gone that you're not sure what's happening there, there's nothing wrong with deleting all of this on your hosting space and just copying fresh another version from your local over. That's fine. It'll take longer. So you'll want to get to the point where you're only copying over new things, but it's always good right around now to do a file management checkup and let me know if you have any questions or if you need any help with that.